Let's talk about the Chinese spy trial. The Attorney General, Richard Hermer, Lord Richard Hermer, the Prime Minister's human rights lawyer mate, he was giving testimony yesterday to a parliamentary committee about the collapsing of this case, which is clearly down to the government because the Crown Prosecution Service says we cannot convict or successfully prosecute these two guys who are accused of spying, selling secrets to China, unless the nation is prepared to classify China as an enemy of the state. These two guys, I should stress, deny that they were spies or that they in any way were betraying this nation. They deny that, but they never got to trial because the nation, this government per se, refused to say China was an enemy of the state, and therefore the entire case collapsed. Hermer said that prosecutors have worked in good faith, seeking to secure convictions against Christopher Cash and Christopher Berry, who, as I say, deny any wrongdoing. But the Official Secrets Act of 1911 posed a very significant problem. He said also words to the effect that it was outrageous to accuse the government of chicanery here. Outrageous. He's fond of saying that kind of thing. This is the little cretin that gave Chagos to Mauritius, China's best friend. Seems to have a bit of a thing for China, doesn't he? Let's talk. Let's talk to Sir Richard Dearlove, former head of MI6. Good morning, Richard.
Good morning. How are you?
Very, very well. Before we talk, let's have a little listen and look at Lord Hermer testifying at the committee yesterday.
I'm clear in my mind that certainly one very significant problem here was the Act. And the Act wasn't fit for purpose, it was out of date. So the Act under which this prosecution proceeded was the 1911 Official Secrets Act. That was an Act that was introduced in July into the House on July 1911, and it received royal assent a few weeks later in August. And during its passage, there was lots of concern raised that it was not properly scrutinised. In 2017, the Law Commission flagged that the term enemy was deeply problematic and it would give rise to difficulties in future prosecutions. And I think what has played out during this prosecution exemplifies and highlights the difficulties with that term. That is why Parliament was right to pass the National Security Act of 2023 that takes away the problems that were faced by the CPS in this case.
Sir Richard, that is rubbish. That is utter rubbish. There have been quite a few cases where there have been successful convictions on the basis that spies have sold secrets to states that have been classified as enemies, and the success of those cases has rested on the fact that an enemy of the state does not need to be a state with which we are at war with. So he's talking utter crap there, if I may say so. The government has made a complete mess about this. Your feelings?
Well, my feelings, I think, are pretty clear. You don't have to prove that. Well, look, it's not an issue of semantics. It's an issue of fact. Is China a threat to national security? Dump the word enemy. Yes, China is definitely a threat to national security. And it's not the fault of the Act, because you could bring this case, but it's for a jury to decide whether China is a threat to national security. The day after, or pretty much the day after this case was dropped, we had the Director General of the Security Service saying in words of one syllable, China was a threat to national security. He may not have used the word enemy. And advisedly, he probably didn't, because he'd been asked by the government not to. But you could produce him as a witness. I could have given you a list of people who would stand up in court. I'd stand up in court myself. I'm pretty confident a jury could be persuaded that China is a threat to national security, because it's a fact which is correct. The idea that this is semantics to do with the 1911 Act, you're absolutely right. Historically, hundreds of prosecutions have been made successfully. And there was one several months before this Bulgarian spy group, when this issue was actually adjudicated legally on the threat to national security, not the use of the word enemy. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, anyway, you're right, it's semantics, but as I say, the government's case essentially seems to be, or what they're saying, essentially seems to be predicated on the fact that an enemy of Britain has to be a state with which we are at war. And as you say, you don't necessarily have to say China is our enemy, but you can say it's a hostile state, and that case would have succeeded. The truth is, Sir Richard, it's this, isn't it? That this government did not want to classify China as a hostile state, an enemy of the state, a threat to our national security, because it wanted to do big trade deals with China. It wanted to stay on the right side of China, and for that reason, our national security chief advisor, Jonathan Powell, apparently it wasn't actually him, it was his deputy, a guy called Matthew Collins, advised the CPS, I'm sorry, Britain will not help you with this case against these two guys accused of spying, and therefore the trial collapsed. But they didn't do it for legal reasons. They didn't do it for the semantics of what enemy means. They did it because they wanted to stay mates with China for the sake of the British economy. Do you think that's right?
Well, the circumstances make it look as if your analysis is probably correct. Let's go that far. But if you want to trade with China, it doesn't make any difference whether you prosecute China for spying or not on us. The only thing the Chinese understand is reciprocity. We treat them like they treat us. And they spy on us, and you can assume that we spy on them. Look, we have a much better example in front of us, which is Australia, which has a much more complex, a much more important, much larger trading relationship with China. Do the Australians, as it were, ignore Chinese espionage? Of course they don't. They're hot on it, they're looking at it the whole time, they're aggressive on it, and they prosecute cases successfully. I mean, the government have just got themselves into the most enormous mess. And, you know, Hermer is just trying to get them off the hook. And I think it's disgraceful to say that those of us who've criticised the government's action in this case are, as it were, undermining the UK's integrity of national security because we're being critical of the government in this field. They made a complete bog of what should have been a very straightforward espionage prosecution. And I think any of us who've been involved in this profession are really aghast at what's happened.
It's extraordinary. Well, as an expert in the field, Sir Richard, how much of a threat to national security, British national security, is China?
Well, a very significant threat in many different fields. I mean, they've been stealing our intellectual property for years. They've organised the sort of capture of intellectual property in our universities through groups of students placed in strategic bits of the university, graduate students in particular. We've caught them spying in Parliament. Look, it just goes, it's a massive list of activity, and that's what an aggressive nation state does in circumstances where they're trying to increase their power, increase their influence, and it's just part of the international scene that we should accept and react to in a proper and tough fashion. And the Chinese will exploit this to the hilt if we show any sign of weakness.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, I mean, take it as read that, you know, all nations keep an eye on other nations, will be spying on them as well. What should we do, Sir Richard, about this massive embassy that China wants to build in the middle of London? Extraordinarily, most embassies, I think all embassies of foreign countries, are in rented buildings. This one China seeks to own. They're looking for planning permission. What should we do about that?
Well, from the point of view of national security, I think there are two problems. There's one very practical issue, which is communications cables that run either very close to the site or run underneath the site. And the other, I think, is the symbolism of allowing China a massive prestige embassy in such an important location. Do we really want, as it were, to give them this opportunity? The cable issue is more complicated. Can these cables be rerouted? Can they be put in a different place? That's complicated and extremely difficult to do. I mean, my view is this planning application should not be allowed to go ahead because there are too many negatives attached to it. But look, let's be clear, wherever a Chinese embassy is situated, it's going to be used in some respects, not just as a base for diplomacy, but probably a base for some types of espionage as well. And I'm not going to go into detail, but the issue of intercept and the issue of tapping cables is very real and problematic.
Why don't we just offer them a sort of site, for their embassy in Sunderland or somewhere like that? That might help, mightn't it? Sir Richard, very, very good to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time. That's Sir Richard Dearlove, a former head of MI6, a man who knows what he's talking about, obviously. Just saying, this is nonsense. This nonsense about the Official Secrets Act not being fit for purpose. It is. Hundreds of successful prosecutions on the basis of that act. We don't have to be at war with a country to classify that country as an enemy or a threat to our national security. That's how all these other cases have succeeded. That's how this case could have succeeded had the government not have decided politically to be friendly to China. That's what this is all about. That's what this is all about. And don't forget, this is a classic case of deputy heads will roll. Turns out that this guy, Matthew Collins, who is the deputy chief security advisor to the government, he works for that guy, Jonathan Powell. He's the one who's taking the blame for this. He's the one who's being blamed for ruining this case. It's not him, it's the government. The government say it's all him. The government policy, the policy of Britain in terms of China, the biggest country or one of the greatest threats to our security in the world, that all of our policy wasn't decided by the Prime Minister or the Cabinet or the government. It was decided by a relatively junior civil servant, not a leader of a department, a deputy. When Kemi Badenoch said, "You mean to tell me that the entire policy of Britain towards China was decided by the Deputy National Security Advisor?" And do you remember, that was in PMQs, and Keir Starmer went, "Yes." That was his answer. That was his answer. And for that, Dan Hodges is among the many senior political commentators who are accusing Keir Starmer in that instance of telling the Commons an outright lie. Hard not to disagree with Dan, isn't it, in those circumstances?